Hey, besties and bosses. Happy Tuesday. I feel like, am I looking at the right place? I don't know what's going on with this. I feel like our lens angles a little differently, and I feel like I'm trying to look here, but I'm looking over there on the camera. But hopefully it looks like I'm looking at you because I want to be, and I'm very excited for our conversation. I always love when I get to hang with you all. We're going to talk about some good stuff, about some productivity, and really looking at it through a couple different lenses. I think sometimes productivity, well, I think it gets really confused in our online space, and there's so many mixed messages, but I think sometimes we can also kind of attack it from a lens or an angle that doesn't really serve us in business. So we're going to look at this through a different couple lenses. Hi, whoever's joining, and those of you on the replay as well. I know this is one of those really big topics, and I think it's also confusing, but also so important because in business, like it or not, our ability to be productive and productive around the things that actually matter and generate income really does matter. Our action really does precede results. So if you have questions as we're talking through this or reflections, drop them below. If you're watching the replay as well and you have questions, drop them below. And if there's anything you want me to go into more, I'm always happy to do another live on any of this because I feel like this is one of those things that can sometimes seem really simple, but also be confusing. I also want to know from everyone, I feel like we're in deja vu with Omicron, COVID, how everyone's feeling, how everyone's doing, how that is affecting everyone. I know in New York City, it's kind of, I don't know, it feels very much deja vu. The world is open, but it feels funny. I think it was 2 weeks ago, I said I just was waiting on test results. Apparently I'm negative. I got a negative test result back, but I definitely feel like I might be a false negative and I've gone through some of those symptoms. So I just want to know how everyone's feeling as well. Get a pulse from the group. I hope everyone is feeling well. And for all my parents out there, how you're doing. Kids are back at home. I hope you're doing okay with the kiddos at home. I know my heart just goes out for all the parents, especially with the young ones who can't go to school. I know it's more challenging for everyone. Hey, Courtney, how are you? How are you all doing with the Omicron COVID? I hope you and your family, I know you have kids. So just thinking about all the business owners with the kids, and hope everyone is hanging in there. So productivity. So I think y'all have to tell me how you feel about this. I feel like our online space, the pendulum just swings from like hustle more to grind it out to like be in the flow to do less better to do more and don't worry about perfectionism to productivity doesn't matter at all and just do you, boo, to, I don't know, there's just so many messages I think in our space, and I think it can be a little bit like WTF. And then I think this time of year, particularly with goal setting and resolutions and planning systems and parties and literal planners, I think it can get extra noisy around this is the way to plan, this is how to be productive. Expectations can get really high, pressure can get high, business goals can get stressful. So we're going to break all that down and talk about what I have found to be really supportive for me and for my clients. And I think what's really interesting is thinking about today's live. Just this week alone, I've supported clients with productivity and showing up. And literally, I want to say in the last day or two, we've had conversations around literally being productive with content and marketing, and the approach, the solution, so to say, has been so different per person, even though on the surface, maybe it's been write more content, get it out for my marketing to book clients. I would say, like, just thinking back on the 3 last calls about that, the approach, the reason that the productivity hasn't been flowing as easily has been different for everyone. And so the solution approach has been different, even though the outside action has been the same. So I want to talk about this through the clarity, mindset, strategy, action lens. And then I'll give you some really practical insights into some of the things I do as well as my team. So even if you have a team member or you're working with team, hang with me because I think a lot of this applies to team as well, and really being efficient with team. Because one of the things we did the live a couple weeks ago, we added 132K in revenue last year without me working more. I actually worked less, even though I was overbooked at one point. And I think we added on another podcast, the first podcast, but more content. So I think we were more productive in terms of output, and absolutely I had team support, but we also have a really great profit margin. And a lot of what we're looking at with team is, yes, productivity, but also efficiency and what makes sense. And so it's sort of like, if we're not mastering this for ourselves as CEOs, it's really hard to delegate in a way where your team's efficient and you're having that ROI that makes sense. So we're gonna chat about all of that. Hey, Danielle, Courtney says I had a negative test too, but man, did I feel crummy last week. Courtney, I swear, I just read something about this. I really think, not to be negative about it, I do think there's a lot of false negatives. And then I think there's the psychosomatic part of it and weather and all of that as well. But same thing, I'm pretty sure I had a false negative. I have been doing a personalized, self-imposed quarantine lockdown the last 2 weeks. So is my husband, because we're not entirely sure that our negatives are actually accurate. So I feel you, especially with the kids at home. Cornelius completely agree on both points. But that being said, so grateful. It seems like we're having things flatten out a bit and that people are at least feeling better through this variant. And also nice to see you, Danielle. All right, so all the productivity things. So kind of just again to work us into this, I think what I think is really important to think with productivity are a few things. One, there is no one size fits all, of course, but I do think it's kind of crazy as business owners to think that our productivity and our output doesn't matter. I think sometimes that's where the messaging can, like the pendulum can swing a little in our online space. And the truth is productivity does matter. Our output does matter. Our output, our action is what yields result. Our team's action and output yields results, and our time is worth money. As a CEO, our team's time is worth money. We're paying them. And so if we're sort of like, because I think sometimes it can almost be like, well, you do you and just be in the flow and do what feels good. But then when we have zero focus on productivity or care about that, that's also when it can be really frustrating, because things can take a long time and cost you or team a lot of money to produce, and it can feel like a business isn't sustainable because it takes so much work to get anything done. That feels really important. And with that, kind of on the flip side, it also feels really important to say, and working your ass off and hustling and grinding to the ground and doing all the things is also not the solution. And that is not the thing that, I don't know a single business owner who's like, you know what, last year I did all the things, I burned out, I did 5,000, I was like super productive, like, and that felt productive, and that brought me in a ton of money into my business. Like that's not what we're hearing either. And I always like to remind clients when they're getting either messaging to remember, usually when we're hearing either side of this, it's simply someone's marketing. Right? If we're hearing like, you do you, be in the flow, that's what matters in business. This isn't throwing shade, but it's usually that's what someone believes, and they're selling something to help you tap into flow and into that energy. And probably the problem that they're solving is something more on kind of the burnout side. Same on the other side when someone's talking more about like getting things done, and that's usually tied more to their marketing, and usually they're speaking to someone who has a challenge of getting things done. So I think just keeping that in mind, but then remembering as a CEO what actually matters in business and having that awareness. And what I like to think about with productivity is then really focusing on what is the right productivity for my business at this time. And so before I go into like some of the productivity hacks and like ways we get more done without doing all the things, I think first things first is that clarity piece and that awareness piece, and spending some time as a business owner, getting clear on what is the productivity that matters for this business, what is the productivity that moves the needle forward. And the needle forward can be in terms of money generating activities. It can also be personal fulfillment. There are absolutely things I do that are productive and that have an output, but I'm very clear that the ROI is more, creative or more self-fulfilling. We're not making that wrong, but I think when we don't have the clarity on that, it's just really easy, especially this time of year with all of the noise about the things you can be doing, to feel like there are 1,000 things to do, and then either to try to run at a bunch of things and get those diminishing returns, or to get that deer in the headlights, like overwhelm, like I can't focus and do nothing. And that's the thing we really want to minimize. I think the biggest killer of productivity is simply a lack of clarity. And so step one, I always think about is like, how can we literally create space and time to create clarity, to create awareness around what are the things our business, your, mine, like what our individual businesses really are asking for us to be productive in. And what I like to think about this is then to check back in with, is this the right productivity for my business? So sometimes we have a laundry list of to-dos. I'm constantly re-looking at what are the things I'm saying I need to be productive around, and checking in with, is this the right productivity for my business? And when I say right, that means I need to know what are my current business goals. And I also need to know like some of my values, and I also need to know what does generate business income in my business. So really being clear on that, and then also checking in with, and this is almost like a whole nother live stream, but I mentioned this in the notes for this, also checking in with where are things getting added to your to-do list that are like really checking in where they're coming from. So I think sometimes when we're getting clear on what we can be productive around and what drives results in our business, we have to be very, very mindful of, are we adding things to our to-do list that are actually serving the business and what the business actually needs and is asking of us? Or are we adding things because this is coming from a place of scarcity or fear or not enoughness or pressure to perform or to be more perfect or to prove that we're so good at what we do? I think there can be a lot of things that y'all know I'm biased to coaching, but I think this is why having outside support can be so beneficial, even with something like creating our productivity list or our to-do list. Being really mindful that a to-do list is very different than productive output, and just checking in with, where are some of these things coming from? Are these coming, again, just check in with, is this what my business needs from me? Does this actually serve the business? Is this actually going to move the needle forward, whether that's internally or monetarily? Or is this coming more from personal hole I'm trying to fill? And really trying to separate those out, because I think another big killer of our productivity and kind of where we can get into that trying to do all the things place sometimes can from a form of we're feeling scarcity or we're feeling not enough. So just checking in with that. Danielle says ha. I'm not sure which part you said ha to, because I'm seeing this later, or I'm seeing this after I was on a little bit of a riff. But now I want to know what the ha was too. So I just totally lost my train of thought. We were talking about having that awareness and focusing on the right productivity. The other thing with this and with the awareness clarity piece, and I swear this can sound like, oh my gosh, I just need to get stuff done. I have too much on my plate. Why would I spend all this time creating clarity? But I think it's Brendan Burchard in, what's his book? It's, is it Success Habits, Success Principles? He talks about this, and there's a ton of research on this, how people who are successful spend more time planning on average than people who aren't. And part of that is what we're talking about here, because if we fail to plan, if we don't take some time to plan and to create clarity around the things we're going to be productive around, not only does that mean we can mismanage our time or get in our own way or not show up for the things we need to do, but we really can end up with things on our, we just start running at things without understanding why, and running at things that are more from an emotional response or emotional reaction instead of really what drives the business forward. And something I find, and a lot of work around my own trauma healing, a lot of my clients, these are conversations we have as well. Obviously, I'm not a therapist, but this absolutely comes into business. I think it's just really interesting to notice, particularly for those of you who have done work around trauma. I raise my hand on this. I think busyness and running and overworking can also sometimes be a way we try to soothe ourselves and protect ourselves. And so just noticing how this time to plan really helps us take some of that emotionality out, so we really can create clarity around that. And then on the other side of this is something I was talking about with clients yesterday, also understanding why the things you want to be productive around, how they really serve your business. We were chatting, this is why I say, two people can be having resistance around the same thing for very different reasons. And I was chatting with two clients today, or one client today, one client yesterday, about they were having a really hard time showing up for and being productive with content and marketing. And one client, it was the noise in her head thinking she needed to be better and she was stupid and it wasn't good enough. The client yesterday, we were talking about, it really didn't seem like it was that important of a task, and they hadn't made the link in their mind as to why this marketing action, how this was linked to generating revenue in the business. And so while it was on a to-do as something to do and something they wanted to be productive around, that's what they were saying, internally, subconsciously, they were sort of why would I waste my time on this? This doesn't even matter. And so I think we can see here so much of what's productive or our output really comes back to what's our thought process under it. Are we worried about being stupid, not good enough, and therefore pulling back and not doing something, or overworking something for the 400th time? Or do we not even think it really matters, and so we're not showing up for it at all or making time for it? Both of those, or do we not even have clarity on what thing to do? All of this is going to really impact your productivity. I always say to clients, no one is lazy. No one here is stupid. If we're not showing up and we're not having the productive output, as Brendan Burchard says, prolific output we want, generally there's something going on under the hood that's preventing us from moving forward. So we want to just create awareness around what are the things we want to move forward around, and if we're not, really what's coming up for us, what's preventing us from showing up that we want to take a look at. All right, comments, let's see. Danielle says, oh, sorry, when you said when people are doing all of the things and burning out, that it was worth it or what's created result. When you said when people are doing all of the things and burning out, that it was worth it or that's what created results. Haha. Okay, totally get you now. Thank you for, and no sorry at all. I go on a riff and then I realize there are comments. So no sorry and thank you. Thank you for clarifying for me. And Courtney says, yes, busyness can be so comforting and keep us in that safe place. For everyone here, this feels so, thank you, Courtney, for saying this. This feels just so important for us just to be so transparent around, because I think for most of us, especially as high achievers, and I think everyone for the most part in this group would probably identify in some way, or a recovering high achiever or a recovering perfectionist. And for any human, whether you have trauma with a capital T or lowercase t, I think busyness can be such a form of self-soothing and such a way we try to keep safe and such a way we try to protect. And I think it's just so important to normalize that. Because otherwise, I think it's just so easy to think you're the only one, or to not even be able to have that awareness that that's coming up. So thank you, Courtney, for saying that. Really and truly, I think there is such a secondary gain we get from busyness, where it's it just feels so good to be busy. There are so many other things we get to avoid. I mean, there's so much there. We'll have to do a whole live stream on this, but just again to normalize. And that just made me think, for anyone who likes Carolyn Elliott's work, Existential Kink, I love that, because I was saying that, I think sometimes we can also get off on the busyness if you know her work at all. So I think, again, just so normal to see, because we can then think, I have a productivity problem, I suck, I can't show up, I have too much on my plate, I can't get the things I want done in business. We can create all these stories when in fact, none of those stories are even remotely true. There's just a reason we're craving the busyness, because it's meeting our needs on some level. So if we don't address that, it doesn't matter how many to-do lists and how many productivity hacks I give you, it doesn't matter how much I tell you to block your time, you're still not going to show up for the thing. You're still going to feel busy. Danielle says, totally, keeping busy was a way I felt like I could maintain control because of my trauma. Thank you for sharing that, Danielle. I appreciate both of you so much. And 1,000%, I've shared, I don't know here, definitely on the podcast a lot, been doing EMDR for about 6 months now. And one of the reasons I started doing EMDR is I realized that I have such a same kind of thing here. I have such a, I don't know if addiction's the right word, but there is a way in which work and being busy has become just such a way I've learned to cope and handle trauma as well. So just feeling both of you on this and appreciating you for sharing this and just normalizing it. I think it's with so many things in business. I think we all forget that everyone running businesses is human, and then suddenly put pressure on ourselves or on other people to suddenly not run their business as a human, and to forget that the human experience is going to come into business. So appreciate you both, and all the hearts back. So this all feels important because I'm going to go into some practical things, and I'm going to say some things like, here are some ways we've been able to be really productive, and here are some things that we really focus on with team, and kind of some overall frameworks we use in my business that have allowed us to scale and that have allowed us to have more output. I think we put out a fair amount of content, and we've done so without increasing more hours of work as team, but keeping a really great profit margin and all of that. But if we're not speaking to some of this, the awareness, the kind of clarity awareness piece and the mindset piece, all of this is just going to feel really frustrating, because we kind of need the clarity and mindset under it to support the practicals. So anyone watching in the replay, if you have questions about that clarity awareness, and that clarity awareness piece, again, is getting clear on what's the right productivity for my business. What does my business actually need from me? What actually moves the needle forward? Do I understand why this is even important, or do I not even think this matters in my business? And then also some of those mindset pieces in terms of really being clear on why are certain things, why am I wanting to do certain things? Maybe why am I adding certain things to my plate? Kind of is this a self-soothing thing, or is this really coming from, again, this serves the business? But going into some of the practicals here with being able to get more shit done without feeling like you're doing all the things, without burning out, without feeling like, oh, this has now become a really weird hamster wheel that I was trying to avoid from corporate. A couple things, practicals here that we do. So first and foremost, I think this is so obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Two things that feel Captain Obvious are worth repeating. One, we really, really focus on looking at doing less better and adding on one new big picture item to the business at a time. So whether that is the podcast, for example, as something new or a new offer, I find with productivity and being able to have kind of a prolific amount of output and really being able to get things done in a way that serves your business, there's a way in which we can do a lot. I'm like creative human over here that I if you saw my computer desktop, there's just like things open all over the place. Like I like to have 14 things going on at one time. And I love that for my creative mind. But when it comes to business and being able to produce things that need to go out into the world, what I have found is focusing on fewer things at a time and allowing them to get well oiled really allows for being able to do more things long term. And so we really focus on, for example, with the podcast last year, I waited a hot second for the podcast until we had space to add on the podcast. And we really spent some time oiling the process for the podcast before adding on anything new to our marketing strategy. So I think that feels pretty obvious, but it feels important to say because I think it's just so easy when we're excited about things to forget about that. And then with that, this is something I'm talking about with clients all the time when we talk about scaling. And this is true for growing your business as well, but I think this is particularly true when you're scaling. I think sometimes we're in the place of building. There is a time when you're building your business where you kind of are doing more things at once because there's just a lot more moving pieces. You're building the foundation. But especially when we're looking at scaling and you're kind of already full in at capacity. So it's like, how do I take what's here and grow more, especially with productivity? I always like to remind clients, we have to create space first to be able to have room for something new to come in. Scaling is all about creating capacity for more to come in without doing more work, right? So it's like, how do we have more revenue come in without doing more work? We also have to have the capacity for that in some way, whether that's mental capacity or literal capacity on a roster. The same is true with productivity. And so I think what can be really helpful, and this is why we really like to create spaciousness around adding new things on that we're productive around. And I think that from the outside looking in, it can seem sometimes like we have so much content going on, we're doing so many things, but generally we're doing like one new thing for like a whole year, and all the other stuff is like, we've just been able to rinse and repeat it enough where it takes less time, or it's been delegated out. So there's really not a whole lot of extra stuff being done, which is what allows for more productivity. And it also allows for more, I don't even want to use the word quality. It allows for things to be done with more ease because any new thing you do takes time to get used to it. And the longer you do it, the easier it gets. We've done a live stream on this. I think there's also an element of, we always think we want quality over quantity, but they've done so many studies that it's quantity that leads to quality. And not that we don't care about quality in my business, but when it comes to productivity, I'm so aware that the more quantity we produce of something, that's what is going to bring us the quality, because through that, we just get better and better. Things get easier and easier. We stop overthinking stuff. We stop getting kind of in my own way, like when I'm creating things, but that just allows for the quality. And so that's why we really like to have that add one new thing on at a time and create the spaciousness for that and allow then for the act of, we're just gonna do this enough times until it becomes easy. And I find that really leads to productivity. And it leads to productivity as well because it releases kind of what we were talking about with some of the mindset stuff. It releases the pressure valve, because when we're so worried about either doing all of the things, we never have a chance to allow for the repetition to lead to ease and quality. Or when we're focused on, like, we're so worried about things being so good and perfect and great for our people, and we just really need to create quality, we also don't, like, that really stifles productivity because we're just overthinking things in our head. So hopefully this is all making sense. So with that, one of the things that I really like to think about with productivity and getting things done is when we are taking a look at, like, literally sitting down to create time to plan. I spent time with my OBM yesterday. We planned out 6 months of master classes, right? We're planning out something new that I'm offering behind the scenes for clients later this year. One of the things we're doing is really looking at where is the space in the calendar for this. And again, this sounds so overly simple, but how many of us are actually looking at, have I created the space and capacity to be productive? How many of us are taking the time to be really clear, create that awareness, look at the mindset around something, and then look at, have I created the spaciousness, or do I need to create space for this productivity to happen? And it sounds, again, super, super simple, but it's, especially if we're excited about something, or especially if we're just like in that like, oh my gosh, my business is going to burn down mode. I mean, I think there's so many different reasons why we can almost bypass this, as opposed to looking at, oh, there's something I want to implement in my business. Oh, there is actually no real capacity if I'm going to do this in a way that honors my values, that honors my time, that honors my schedule, that actually allows me to be productive and get results from this. I need to look out 4 months and put some time in the calendar for when this is going to happen. Hey Kate, nice to have you on. For some reason it told me you were on, and it doesn't usually tell me these things. So again, I know these are like Captain Obvious things, nothing I'm sharing on like some of these practicalities is like brand new information, but hopefully these will be some reminders, and just to see I'm not doing anything differently, but that is literally one of the like cornerstones that allows us to get so much done in my business. It is that planning time, but also really looking at the calendar and literally looking at, do we need to bookmark stuff? Where is the space for this? With that, some really more, these are like boring things, y'all, but I swear this is like, these are also the things that if I didn't do this in my business, I would be a hot mess and wouldn't be able to, or if my team wasn't doing these things, we wouldn't be able to support as many clients we do and put out the content we do and hold as much space as we do. And I think there's something I like to remind clients is really boring, simple, practical practices. Those are really what allow us to thrive in business, because the more we can allow things to be boring and simple and easy, the more mental capacity we have to hold space and to show up and to actually be productive. So with kind of getting like clear on the planning and putting time in the calendar, one of the biggest things that has really supported me with productivity is really looking at scheduling literal time blocks and time, and not creating to-do lists. So what I mean by this, I'm going to use a really simple example here. I found I was missing this with my runs, and so they weren't happening. I'm a runner. I love to run. They're really important to me. They're like a non-negotiable part of my self-care. And I found I was like getting to this place where I was like too busy to go on my run, and they weren't happening. And that was not because I don't like to run or I was resisting my run. Like I really just wasn't seeing the time in my calendar. And what I realized is I had kind of broken my own process and rule that works really well, which is actually scheduling it into my calendar. And instead what I had done is just put it on my kind of like daily to-do list, my checklist, that I was gonna go for a run that day. And y'all have seen this. You've seen the like video where someone has like all the rocks in the glass jar, and they put the rocks into the glass jar. And if they start with all the little rocks and they put them into the jar and like they put the sand in, the big rocks can't fit in. But if you like put the big rocks in, then the sand and little rocks can fit around it. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If someone knows that, you can like link to that if you know what the YouTube video I'm talking about. Our schedules and productivity is very similar. What I find kills productivity so much is really filling our schedule, like making a to-do list and letting our schedule fill up with the sand and the little rocks, and then wondering at the end of the day why the big boulders didn't get done, and thinking, well, I just don't have time for them because the sand and little rocks took up all day long. But this is Parkinson's Law, right? Our tasks expand to the time we have for them. And so if we're just creating big blocks of time, things are just going to take that much time. If I'm just filling my day with things, and then on the side I have like go for a run when you have free time, all of my other things are just going to fill and expand to the time I have. Anyone who's been in college and waited last minute to finish a term paper and realized you could write a like banging term paper and get a great grade on it the night before it was due, not that I recommend that, knows what I'm talking about, because it can also work the other way, right? Our tasks can also contract to the time we have available for them. But for that to happen, we have to schedule in the blocks of time. Otherwise, the sand and the rocks will expand to fill our time container. Hopefully this is making sense. So this is such a small thing, but I found the reason my runs weren't happening is I literally just wasn't putting them in the calendar that it needed to happen at 8 a.m. or at 7 a.m. And so all of the other things I was doing, they were just expanding to the time I had allotted for them. As soon as I put those non-negotiable runs literally and scheduled them into the calendar, I was able to get them done and all the other tasks, all of my other productive things still got done because none of those productive things needed more time. Again, they were just expanding to the time in the calendar. And so this is one of the really simple things I remind clients sometimes when they're not getting stuff done is just to look at, are you making a to-do list for yourself, or are you literally scheduling time blocks in? And I know there's a creative watching me who's like, I hate that idea. Why the fuck would I want to schedule everything in? And why would I want to schedule time blocks, especially for things like my run or my mindset work? Because that seems so constrictive and boxy and corporate and blah. And I know because hi, creative ex-actress, like none of like that kind of stuff feels good to me. And what I want to offer here is a reminder that constraints make us more creative. They've done studies on this, so when we have some actual constraints, whether it's time constraints or creative constraints, like make a painting with only 2 colors, or write a blog post only using these 20 words, right? That constraints actually force our brain to be more creative and to come up with solutions. Time constraints also, just what we were talking about, like they help us be more creative and get more done. Our tasks expand to the time we have. And what I find is the more structured I am with scheduling productivity, scheduling the things I want to be productive around, that I want to get done, the more freedom I feel. Because I feel that ease in knowing things are going to get done, but I also feel that freedom, and then I get to move these blocks around. I can see where my blocks of free time are. If I don't do that, half the shit I want to get done doesn't happen. And then what happens when we say we want to do something and we don't follow through? We erode our self-trust, right? That self-accountability is so important. What happens when we erode our self-trust? We start to feel horrible, right? That starts to mess with our internal world. That really starts to mess with your sense of freedom, because you don't even feel like you have freedom over your schedule because you can't control it. That starts to affect everything in your business. So I really find, while this can feel so structured, I actually feel like it gives so much more freedom and spaciousness, and you can see the spaciousness in your calendar, and so much more internal spaciousness and self-trust. Hopefully this is making sense, because I know I'm ping-ponging a little bit. Let me know if you have questions. But with this to-do list versus time blocking scheduling, I think what's really great here is you also start to get a realistic look at what you can get done in your business and how long things are taking, which is really important for team as well. For those of you who have team, I was just talking about this with a team member today. We were talking about why we like to track time for certain things instead of like just paying a flat rate for something, even though that might be more cost efficient. One of the reasons is I want to know how long things are taking, not because I want team to hurry up or they need to like rush through a project, or we want to like skimp on like how much time something is going to take, but it's really hard for me to know what a project costs and what that means in terms of profitability in the business, and what that means in terms of what it's costing to run the business, if I'm not aware of how long things are taking, if we're just like paying like flat rates for them. And it really helps us to see like, you know, what time we're allocating to something, how long something is taking, again, what makes sense for the business, for the decisions we're making. And this starts with us. If we're not doing this for ourselves, it's really also hard to understand with team, like if this makes sense, or if things are really not adding up, or if something's taking way too long and maybe they need more support, or they need a resource, or maybe they're overthinking things, or they don't have the process, like the SOPs that they need to get something done. So, but if we're not starting with ourselves, we really don't even have that context for team. And it's also really hard to lead your team that way. So without going too far off on a tangent on this, I think this is one of those things that's really supportive for us as business owners. It's also really supportive for team. And big picture, we're talking about part of this is productivity for money making, right? Without doing all the things. It's if we're not aware of your time is so valuable. Your time is the most valuable asset. It is non-renewable. It's the most valuable asset for you as a business owner, period. You can always make more money. Even if it doesn't feel like that in the moment, you can always make more money. You can always get more resources. You can always get more support. You cannot get your time back. And if you're here, you care about your time and spending time with loved ones and with things you care about outside of the business. And that's why I personally think this is so important. Which brings me to my other little thing that we do here. I religiously, once a quarter, time track for a week. And I time track every half an hour for the day. And again, I know I hate spreadsheets. I have a team for all of that stuff. I'm not like spreadsheet person. However, I find some of these really practical things that can feel box in, again, lead to so much spaciousness. They allow for more productivity. They allow for the right productivity that leads to money generating activities that my business needs, that I need. They also really help me to spot where are we not being efficient? Where am I not being efficient? When I time track, I like to leave myself notes. So I give this to clients sometimes. It's just a form with like every half an hour of the day, we track what the actual activity is, and then I have a space for notes. I also like to track how I feel when I'm doing something, because this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with mindset earlier. It's really interesting because then we can sometimes see where some of the blocks are coming up, or where some of the resistance is coming up, or where some of the things where it's like, oh, this isn't really my zone of genius, I probably need to delegate this out, or that's the next thing I need to delegate out. It's really helpful to have that data, because so often when we kind of go back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the live stream around awareness and around getting clarity on what's moving your business needle forward, what are those money generating activities, what are the things your business needs, what are you showing up for, where is your time going? Sometimes we feel busy, even though we're not actually spending that much time doing something. Sometimes it feels like, oh, well, I hate doing content and I can't be productive with content because it takes forever. And I have been spending all day doing content, and like, I'm still like, it's not getting me anywhere, and it's not bringing, and it doesn't even work. So why would I do it? We tell ourselves these stories for myriad reasons. And what can be really helpful is to have time tracking and to see, is that actually true? Or are you spending 20 minutes on content and 14 hours stressing about it, looking at someone else's website, worrying about it, thinking it sucks, revisiting it, editing it, proofreading it, running it by someone, deleting it, reposting it? I don't think anyone's doing that for 14 hours, but you know what I mean? Or like 14 hours resisting actually sitting your butt down and doing it. And so I think that can be really helpful, just to be honest with yourself, but also just so we can see what's actually going on. Always talking with clients about solving the right problem, so you can solve the right problem with productivity. Because again, productivity is not as simple as just do the thing or just do more things, or if you could just like schedule better, then you'd get more prolific output. There's usually so much nuance under that. Everyone here is capable of doing whatever the thing is on the calendar, right? We just want to keep coming back to what's keeping us, preventing us from being as productive as we would like, or as our business needs us to be. So with the time tracking, that really supports those time blocks you're creating. So you're creating realistic time blocks, because I think that's also helpful then to look at, are you trying to put into one day what really needs to be done in 1 week? I think all of us can be guilty of this from time to time. There's a great, what's his name? What is his name? It will come to me. I watched an interview with him like 5 years ago with Marie Forleo. It was a doctor, but he talked about this whole concept of cultivating our lilies, and how easy it is to think, essentially most people think that we can do, how does it go? We think we can do more in a week than we actually can, but less in a year than we're actually able to, and how important it is. I think he said three main tasks a day, 3 main tasks like a week, a month, a year. And that kind of goes back to the focus on fewer things. And most of us, if we were to look at just a to-do list instead of a time structure list, when we look at productivity, there's like 17 things on there, but most of us really are able to do just a few quality tasks a day. All right, I'm gonna try to not go off on too many tangents here. So 2 more pieces here that I find really help with productivity and getting shit done in business. So if you have that clarity and you've cleared some of the mindset gunk out, right? And you've gotten clear on what those things are, and you've put the time blocks in, you've actually spent some time planning these things out, so you actually see you have space for them in your calendar, and you understand why this is how this supports your business and how this supports results. A couple other things that I find really, really helpful that I like to do, and this is also when myself and when Amanda, my OBM, when we're looking at team and kind of how we're delegating things to team, one of the things we like to look at is, how are we creating repeatable, boring AF, repeatable tasks and processes. So I really strive to have business feel as boring as possible. I get my fulfillment from doing stuff like this, from being live with you, from supporting clients, from the actual work itself. But the tasks themselves, the productivity, we try to make the system, the process, as boring, as drama-free, as predictable as possible, and as repeatable as possible. And I find this really supports productivity when you can start to look at, oh, hey, I go live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. and here are all the things that go into making that happen. How can I make this something I repeat all the time and put a process around this and make this, like, it's so a non-negotiable and so boring that I don't have to think about it. What I get to think about is I always talk about the content of the content, right? The context of the content, not I'm actually going to sit down and do the thing. Same thing with team. I find this is how we can be so much more productive with team and more efficient in terms of team spend. And I think it makes their lives a lot easier. How are we making sure we're doing things over and over and over again, that they're repeatable and that our process is pretty predictable and similar, that we're not reinventing the wheel every week? Just imagine if I was like, well, I go live on Tuesday this week. Next week, actually, I'm going to go live, but I'm going to go live on Instagram and it's going to be on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Even that's not a huge shift, right? It's still going live, but think of how many different moving pieces there are. If I'm sending out an email, if I'm putting out a post in the group, if we have a graphic for that, if I have to set things up, if my team has to grab stuff to then put into an email for the replay, if suddenly I'm shifting even something like Tuesday at 6 p.m., this is the stuff we do every single week, and I'm shifting everything around that way, and I'm doing that every single week, that means either I have to constantly think through all of those steps to catch up with what I'm doing, which slows down productivity of actually creating the content because I have to think through, like, right, that's all time. Or my team has to slow down, stop everything, rethink through all of that, communicate with one another. And we can see how if we're doing this with every single thing in our business that we're trying to be productive around, how much this slows down the wheel, makes everything feel really, really heavy. Whereas you can actually do so much less, so much faster with so much ease if you look at and really have a goal of how can we do repeatable things and how can we make them predictable and boring? And then let the actual content of what you're doing feel exciting and fulfilling and fun and interesting. So hopefully that makes sense. With that, the other thing we really try to do, that I try to do myself and that I try to, like myself or Amanda, when we're looking at kind of who's getting delegated what, is really looking at if we're in a task, how can we group similar tasks together? And if we're in a task, how can we try to leverage, if we're in something, leverage getting more than one output from it? So what I mean by this in terms of grouping tasks together, I'm sure you've heard this whole idea, like when you multitask or context switch, we temporarily lower our IQ by 15 minutes. Kind of wild. It's like the same as I think drunk driving or driving on weed or something like that when you context switch. And what do most of us do when we have a bunch of stuff to do and we're feeling busy and we're trying to be productive? We're like trying to write a post and then like jumping into supporting clients and then jumping on a client call and then like trying to quickly write an email and then try to write a follow. Like we're trying to do all of these different things and we're constantly context switching. We're doing that because we're trying really hard to be productive and get a lot of stuff done. But what happens is when we're doing this, we're actually diminishing our returns because I think it takes 15 minutes to refocus and you're temporarily lowering your IQ and ability as you do that. And so what I find is so much more efficient and allows you to get so much more quality work done is really grouping tasks together. So for example, to the best of my ability, I try to group all of my client calls in a row, right? So I'm not like on a client call and then in Basecamp and then creating content and then recording a podcast, right? I'm trying to group everything together. When it sounds so basic, but when I respond to emails or when I send follow-ups, I literally have a time block on my calendar. I'm doing that all at one time. I'm not like checking an email here, hopping on a call, writing a piece of content. When I write content, I have a time block where all I'm doing, I close all the tabs on everything, is just writing that content. When I support clients in Basecamp, same thing, right? I have a literal time block. It's not like, let me just fit it in between stuff, where that's all I'm doing. So that I'm really grouping similar tasks together as opposed to jumping around. And that really, really supports your productivity exponentially. Not just me, stats say this. With that, so if I'm thinking about team, we're always thinking about if we're in something, how can we maximize the productivity within that? So for example, I get support with the podcast. I'm going to use this as a team example, but you could use this for yourself as well, kind of with the idea of grouping things together. If I'm having someone support me with editing my podcast and I'm paying them for that, I'm paying them time to go in and be in my podcast, right? That is time my business is spending to produce this podcast. We're thinking, how can we make sure we're maximizing that time and energy spend for the productive output? So if I'm going to have someone go in and edit, maybe I also want to have them pull an audiogram while they're in there instead of like either not doing that, which wouldn't take that much more time because they're already in the task, or asking someone else to go do that later to listen to the whole podcast, right? And basically doing the task twice. Same with, I have an awesome Caitlin, I love you. She pulls notes from the podcast for us. So if I'm having her go in there and do that, we're thinking, okay, you're already in there, we're already paying you for that. How can we group tasks together? How can we maximize energy? We know, right? Like stopping and starting isn't that productive. It also is going to cost literally time, but also money for the business. And so I'm thinking about when I'm doing tasks. So I want to think, okay, if someone's in there doing that, how can we really leverage that productive output? What else could someone do for me while they're pulling show notes? Oh, could she pull a piece of repurposed content for me? Right? Like, yes, it's going to be a little bit more work, but it's going to be far less work for her while she's already in there, while she's in the same task because she's not context switching, right? To kind of leverage that effort for two productive outputs, then for her to do that, then for me to go back and re-listen to it and kind of remember and like repurpose content, or for someone else to go and do that and have all of these different like hands in the pot, so to say, or fingers in the pot, where it makes so much more sense for someone who's already in there to do that. It would be the same thing if I were editing the podcast. My first podcast I ever had, I edited, right? When I started my business, I didn't have the resources to do that, but it was the same thing. I was thinking, okay, if I'm already in here editing, how can I not context switch, and how can I leverage the productive output from this time and energy? It's going to take me 10 extra minutes while I'm editing to grab an audiogram or to grab the show notes while I'm in here in the bullet points, instead of trying to do that at a separate time. So hopefully that makes sense, but I find that is one of the biggest things that can serve you in terms of productivity, but also in terms of leveraging your team and having them be really efficient. And I think it makes it easier on them as well. I feel like I had a thought pop in that I wanted to share with that. This is like kind of a side note. It's not quite in the productivity realm, but it is a little bit. I think with this, one of the things we always think about with being productive as well, because really maximizing and leveraging my time it's one of my like top priorities as a CEO, because I know how valuable it is. And so with that and with productivity, one of the things I'm always thinking as well is, if I'm going to sit down and do something in my business, I really need to understand what is the ROI of my time and of that productivity. And ideally, I want to know that I can leverage what I'm producing in more than one way. We've talked about this in other live streams, so I'll be brief here, but for example, it's one of the reasons I think Clubhouse is an amazing app. I think it's great. One of the reasons I'm currently not on it is I have yet to figure out a really effective way to leverage my time and to maximize my productive output from that in more than one way. I know if I go in there, I'm essentially going to spend whatever time, and I can't leverage that again. And so while that would be productive and that would be really great marketing and relationship building and money generating in that way, I can only leverage that once. And when I'm thinking about being productive, and when I'm thinking about what serves my business, and when I'm thinking about that prolific output, I want to think, but how can we leverage this more than once? Whereas here, I get to hang out with all of you, but we get to leverage this in so many ways. I get to send this in the replay. We get to repurpose this for other content, right? We get to use this in multiple ways. It gets to live on my website. And so I know that I can really leverage the productive output. And so it's really the right kind of productivity for my business, which is kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of the live stream. Okay, hope that is helpful and makes sense. Just seeing here, I feel like I had one more thing. Okay, this was the last thing I wanted to share with you in terms of just kind of how I think through taking action for that productivity, so we can get more done without doing all the things. So kind of two things here that might sound like they contradict each other, but they really do support one another. One, kind of with what we were talking about, the clarity piece, and with everything here we're talking about just in terms of kind of structuring time. And y'all, when I say structuring time and time blocking, I literally time block my mindset work. Because otherwise it doesn't get done. So I think just like give full transparency there, and just, you're not wrong if that's what you need to do, or to find the system that works for you. But I find most people who are really productive in a way that serves them, and serves them in a way so that they're not burning out and that really serves their business, really are very, very, very mindful of their time, and they treat their time like money. This is kind of a side tangent, but like that is actually how I think about time like money. And I think if I'm not being mindful and respecting my time, it is like taking money and lighting it on fire. So with that, I like to really be clear on what are those non-negotiables. Like I said, my run is a non-negotiable self-care for me, and I have to treat it that way, that I want to be consistent with when I'm scheduling. And then within those non-negotiables, what I find in terms of actually creating, producing content or producing output or producing value that we're putting into the world. It's a little of what we were talking about earlier that I just wanted to close with. I really believe in doing less, doing more of less. So choosing those few things you want to fill those spaces with, but then within those few things you're focused on. So for me, it was adding the podcast on last year, right? Or I'm adding something behind the scenes on later this year. When I'm looking at that, within those fewer things, I like to think, then how can I do more of that one thing? It doesn't have to be one thing, it might be three things, right? But how can I do more of that? Because again, what we were talking about earlier, I know the more I do of something, the more quantity is going to lead to quality. It is through repetition that I create a well-oiled machine. It is through repetition that I master something. It is through creating a bunch of stuff, producing a lot of stuff, that we create quality. And it is also through giving permission around doing more of less that we remove the pressure, we take off the perfectionism. And this is not from a like do a whole bunch of stuff to burn out. That is not what I'm talking about. But just in the sake of like choose fewer things to focus on, and then within that you can go deep into that, and that really is what is going to allow for more of that productivity and prolific output that leads to the money generating results, that leads to the quality, that leads to doing so in a way that doesn't feel like you're doing all of the things, but doing a few things that like you get to do a lot of, but it feels super, super easy. So hopefully that makes sense, because I do think that can sound a little conflicting, but I actually think it is a way in which we can create a lot of ease and spaciousness. So I'll use the podcast as the example. Instead of like, I'm going to do a podcast for a little bit and then maybe live stream for a little bit and then maybe test Clubhouse and then maybe go write a book, and then I'm gonna test out Snapchat and TikTok. See, instead, if I was really deepening into mastering the podcast, how can I just do more of that? How can I focus on that? How can I deepen onto that? How can I really allow myself to even record more episodes and know that through doing that, that's how it just gets better and easier, and that's how we get more output. So hopefully that makes sense. I did a whole live stream on this concept, which I think sounds so ass backwards to me, but I've really just found it to be true. And they've done some studies on it. So I'll see if I can find a link to that for anyone who's interested on that concept. Okay, I think those are the main things. Oh, I have a note on here to say the one last thing here. What is this? Two last things here. Mindset work also around being really clear on the things that you're not going to focus on. So I think we talked about this a little bit at the beginning with the awareness, but I think part of what allows us to be productive and part of what's allowed me to be productive, and like, I don't get it perfect. Obviously I was sharing about the running example, but being able to really leverage these tools is also knowing that I think sometimes the biggest key to productivity and having more of the quality productivity that drives money in your business and does so without you feeling like you're having to do all the things is also seeing one of the biggest pillars for that is really learning where to say no. And the more, it's like Warren Buffett. I think it's Warren Buffett who says the difference between successful people and really successful people is really successful people say no to almost everything. And I think seeing that always feels counterproductive. I think sometimes think the way to be more productive is to say yes to everything. But truly, it's what we were just talking about. The way to be really productive in a way that serves making money in your business is starting to cultivate the mindset and that CEO mindset that does value your time and that does see like my time is money. And if I'm not being mindful of it and holding boundaries around it, it is like lighting it on fire, which means I'm probably going to have to say no to a lot of things, including opportunities, including things that could make me money, including things that are really fun and really exciting, not like personally for you, but like to do in business, including fun things I would love to sell, including fun. I told you there's something I'm really excited that I'm doing behind the scenes that I have to wait a few months because there's just not the space on the calendar for it to get the attention it needs. And it would just be so much more fulfilling to do it right now. But what I've learned is so much of what allows us to have that productive output is really starting to see where are all the places, like the really great, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 7s that we have to start practicing saying no to, because if we're not saying no to even the 7s and sometimes the 8s, you don't have space for the 9s and 10s to thrive, and you can't be productive in that way. And we're talking about being productive, but this could go for so many things, right? This could go for the types of clients you're working with, the types of offer you sell. So I think seeing when you can be really practiced and having that mindset and discipline to say no, kind of like anything that's a 7 or below, I have to say no. And even sometimes the 10s, because there's no space on my calendar, that's what allows you then to say yes and double down on, which is kind of what we were talking about, going deeper into those few things that you have on your plate. For those things that are really exciting, I literally just keep a Google document of ideas and things I want to do for later, but just seeing like they have a place to live, but I just have to start to see them as like, they're kind of like little fires that would come in, like burn up my business if I'm not mindful of them. So I hope that is helpful for y'all. That probably is the biggest productivity hack aside from the clarity and mindset piece. And then I hope some of those practicals give you just a few things to see. It doesn't have to be reinventing the wheel. It's not like you have to have a special kind of planner or a special, I don't know, program. So much of this comes down to, again, the awareness, that clarity piece, the mindset piece of it, and then just putting some of those practical strategies in place to set yourself up for success so that you really can run at those few things to get more done in your business. If you all found this helpful and you want to like hang with me next week, I have a free training talking about productivity, but we are going to talk about the 7 pillars for profit, and we are going to go deep into what goes into creating money on your terms. And there is no one size fits all formula. However, I have been in business for a hot second, y'all. I've been here, it's almost 6 years in March, and I have supported so many people to their first 6 figures, to multi-6 figures, to $1 million plus. We had 11 people last year hit their first 6 figures, and doing so in a way where they're not burning out and where they actually love their business and they actually are excited to scale. And what I've noticed is there are 7 core pillars that I find really supportive business foundation that we want to focus on. So I have a free training. We are doing free masterclass. We're doing that next week in the group. We do have an awesome bonus guide with some really great journaling prompts and questions that Amanda is making all beautiful for you all. So I will drop a link, because in order to get the playbook, you do have to sign up so you can get access to that. And yes, there will be a replay for anyone who is asking. And we will go a little longer. So usually the master classes, I think, run around, I want to say around 90 minutes. I will try to not be too long-winded, but y'all know I like to like go deep and stuff. So we're going to go deep into that. And I would love, love, love to have you. So I will drop that. Danielle says that that will be me this year. Yes, I'm like trying not to curse too much. That is already on the way. That is so you this year. 1,000% it is. So for those of you who want to join me, I will drop a link. I think it's KimArgetsinger.com /7-pillars profit or -profit, but I will drop the link to make sure that is correct. And I would love, love, love to have y'all for that. And then if anyone wants more support with the clarity, mindset, strategy, and action that goes into, yes, productivity, but that goes into building a business on your terms and making money on your terms and doing so in a way that feels good without doing all the things. That is what I support clients with. I'm really, really good at it. I would love to support you. I'll drop a link for a discovery call. We do tend to fill up, so hop on that so you can grab a spot or a spot that's opening up before they're gone for the year. Love you all so much. Thank you for hanging with me. Thank you for being here. It means so much to me. Oh, we're giving away I always forget this. I'm so bad at remembering these things. For the masterclass, if you sign up, we are giving away a free session. If you hang with us live, all you have to do is hang live and comment. We will give away a free session, because I do want to thank and reward those of you for being here and for showing up and for participating. And I just value all of you so much and value you for being in the group. And I know there are a trillion places online that you could hang out and be. So I really want to thank you in the way that I'm able to. So thank you, words, but also we will be giving a session away next week. And thank you so much for sharing the link. You are amazing, Danielle. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. All right. For real, y'all, I'm like doing the Irish goodbye here, the long goodbye. I love y'all. I will see you next week for that masterclass. Bye.